When the Sun Darkens, Orbital History and 2040 AD Return of Planet Phoenix by Jason M. Breshears. Read by Kevin Stevens, also known as Grendel Dark. Chapter 4. Phoenix Cycles Demonstrated. I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. Psalm 77:5. Our history is fascinating and virtually unknown by those we trust to teach it. The Phoenix Cycle, according to Mario Reading in his commentaries on the prophecies of Nostradamus, were deemed to herald the beginnings and ends of great human eras. And this is what we have thus far found to be true. We have chronicled the history of the world from 3895 BC to the flood in 2239 BC, including 1,656 additional years to 583 BC, when the sun darkened, after being predicted by Thales of Miletus, a total period of 3,312 years, or 552 times 6. This was the age of the Phoenix, the second half of this age having each 552-year period, resulting with a disaster and or a major social rearrangement. This astronomical period, involving the orbital cycle of planet Phoenix, seems to have set a precedence throughout human history that serves to hint that the future is but an echo of the past. Though 583 BC appears to end the Phoenix cycle, this is only because the effect, the darkening of the sun, did not reoccur. Further, the time after 583 BC involved a complete paradigm shift in the consciousness of civilization in the Near East and Egypt, as the older Semitic empires fell to Persia, which gave way to the Greeks and later to the might of Rome. As a result, the legend of the Phoenix fell into disrepute and obscurity, fallen prey to the imaginative musings of early cryptozoologists. But the cycle remained true, for precisely on schedule, Phoenix entered the inner system and back into the annals of history. Counting 552 years after 583 BC, we arrive at the year of 31 BC, when Rome was in a civil war. Mark Antony and the famous Grecian queen of Egypt, known as Cleopatra, had formed an alliance, and their military forces clashed with the powerful Roman navy under the command of Octavian. Antony and Octavian vied for the supremacy of Rome, and their armies met and fought in the famous Battle of Actium. As the naval war commenced, a devastating earthquake ravaged the coast, initially killing 10,000 people from the toppling structures. The final death toll was told to exceed 30,000. As the cities caught fire, burning those unable to free themselves from the rubble. The quake afflicted Judea, with the historian Josephus writing that it was believed to be the worst disaster in the history of Judea. It is an interesting coincidence that Josephus comments on this earthquake in 31 BC in Antiquities in Book 15.5.2, 1000 plus 552. Octavian won the struggle, Mark Antony and Cleopatra later committing suicide, with Octavian becoming the famous Augustus Caesar, who initiated a new government throughout all the Roman world, an empire that originally had as its battle standard a picture of the phoenix. The quake during the Battle of Actium parallels the quaking of the previous sun darkenings during the battle between Jacob's sons and the Canaanite kings, and also that of the Tuatha-De Danann against the Fomori during the Battle of Moritura, as well as the global quakes at the flood. Planet Phoenix passed through the inner system, but had fallen out of sync with Earth's position around the sun, failing to transit. But the effect of this planetary body's presence still met with the reactionary earthquakes. That these earthquakes were global is indicated by the ruins found of the Olmecs on the other side of the world at the site now called Tres Zapotes. The Olmecs employed the long count calendar before the Maya inherited it, and the last known Olmec date discovered among the ruins of this stone city was found upon Stela C and translates into our modern reckoning as 31 BC. The ruination that happened at Tres Zapotes may have occurred just weeks or months after this last date inscription was made. In considering the history of Rome, we cannot neglect to review its beginning. The people descended from the Trojans that lost out in the Great War in 1229 BC in Asia Minor to a naval invasion of Greek states, led by the Mycenaeans, eventually settled along the banks of the Tiber River in Italy, among the Etruscans, Latins, and Sabines. They founded a city and called it Rome in 753 BC, which began a 552-year countdown to the end of the Second Punic War in 201 BC, when Rome defeated Carthage, a war that began with a naval invasion by Hannibal of Carthage against the Roman territories. More on Rome shall be disclosed herein. In the year 713 BC, every calendar in the ancient world was changed. A former rock and metal moon of Nibiru almost collided into Earth, known as the Dark Satellite. Its full orbital history is revealed in Anunnaki Homeworld. This was the third regal year of King Numa Pompilius of Rome, and he, like all other regents of his day, had to modify his calendar from 360 days a year to 365.24 days. The priests of various cultures maintained the 360-day count only in their sacral systems. In 713 BC, King Sennacherib of Assyria sought to destroy Jerusalem and the temple, but his army was apparently vaporized in a lightning blast from heaven, a flux tube discharge between the dark satellite and Earth, such as one photographed between comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 and Jupiter in 1994. 552 years after this amazing year was 161 BC, the year the Jews cleansed the temple after the passage of the prophesied 2,300 days, after the Syrian king Antiochus Epiphanes IV desecrated the temple with pig's blood. Amazingly, Sennacherib is famous in the scriptures for his letter to King Hezekiah of Jerusalem that claimed that no god or gods could deliver Jerusalem from the might of Assyria. And 552 years after Antiochus called himself by the name Epiphanes, which means God manifest or is present. This was 161 BC, when a reddish rain contaminated ponds and lakes and a plague originating in the Middle East and Persia began afflicting Roman provincial regions. Additional connections between Assyria and Syria can be found. The emerging eastern power of Media that made war against the Lydians during the 583 BC sun darkening, now, in the year 615 BC, under King Artaxerxes, made war against the Empire of Assyria, which was the superpower of the Middle East at that time. This began a 552-year period to 63 BC, when the Roman general Pompey conquered Syria and annexed Judea as a provincial territory of Rome, the Western superpower of the time. Assyria is connected to Rome in another startling way. In the year 607 BC, Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon, noted primarily in this book for reigning during the 583 BC sun darkening, who is descended from Nebuchadnezzar I, who reigned during the 1135 BC sun darkening, utterly defeated the Assyrian army. The 10 tribes of Israel had been forcefully settled among the Sumerian and Scythian peoples by the Assyrians, deported away from Israel in 745 BC, exactly 138 years before Assyria's army fell to Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon. Many of these descendants of Israel, now mixed among the Germanic peoples, fled Asia and began dispersing throughout Asia Minor, parts of Greekdom, and Europe. They had fully assimilated the Assyrian program with the Germanic deportees and reappeared at this time on the world scene under the new identities as the Celts and the Gauls. These peoples formed kingdoms all around the fringes of the Roman provincial territories throughout Europe, as far as Iberia, or Spain, which preserves the name Hebrew, Iberia, as does the river Ebro. Nebuchadnezzar's victory began a 552-year countdown to Julius Caesar's Roman invasion of Britain in 55 BC, the greatest of Celtic strongholds. The Babylonian victory and violence against the formerly oppressive Assyrians was a shock felt throughout the ancient world, heralding to the people of the Near East that a change was coming, just as the unprecedented invasion of Britain over the English Channel. Nebuchadnezzar's victory marked the 666th year since Assyria had first become an empire in 1273 BC, when Assyria annexed Babylon and adopted the winged disc, or phoenix, as its official Great Seal, an emblem both Rome and then the United States would adopt prior to changing this legendary bird symbol to that of the eagle. Amazingly, as we will see in Chapter 7, this year of 1273 BC was the exact year planet Phoenix entered the inner system. This was the start of the Assyrian Empire, which would go through phases and later lose territories only to acquire them again, such as in the case of the Rebellion of Babylon. Exactly 144 years, 12 times 12, after 1273 BC, the city of Babylon would be reconquered by the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser I in 1129 BC. The Assyrian deportation program, removing the 10 tribes of Israel, lasted 24 years, starting in 745 BC. The final year that the remaining tribes were taken into Assyria and settled among other subdued nations was 721 BC under Sargon II, precisely 552 years after 1273 BC, the beginning of Assyrian Empire. Intriguingly, counting 552 years before 745 BC, we arrive at an earlier invasion of Israel in 1297 BC, when the Canaanite general Sisera subdued the tribes of Israel and made them pay tribute. They were later delivered by Barak and Deborah in 1277 BC. In 931 BC, 2964 AM, the 10 tribes of Israel split from the kingdom of Judah, effecting the establishment of the two kingdoms, mirroring the early Egyptian two kingdoms of Israel and Judah. 1,000 years exactly after this political subdivision was the fateful year of 70 AD, when the Romans under Vespasian and his son Titus conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, 3964 AM. The kingdom of Judea was crushed by the legions, and Josephus reported that over 1 million Jews died defending their city or were executed afterward, and that 97,000 people were sold into the slave markets. The fields were salted, just as the Romans had done to Carthage, and the temple relics and artifacts were all taken to Rome, and reliefs of them were immortalized upon the Ark of Titus. The virtual end of Jewish nationality began a 552-year period to the emergence of another enemy of the Jews, Islam, and the start of the Muslim calendar in 622 AD, known as the Hijra. The Hijra calendar is adhered to today for the entire Islamic world, a culture that shares an ancestral animosity with the Jews, passed down from patriarchal times concerning ownership of the land of Israel/Palestine. Muslim armies invaded modern Israel in their 1948 AD Independence War, Six-Day War, and Yom Kippur War. In 312 AD, the Roman realms are again engaged in civil war. On his way to subdue his rival, Maxentius, Emperor Constantine the Great sees a comet while en route with his army. The event eventually ignited his conversion to Christianity, or was used as a ploy to justify it. Though we will not indulge in the 414-year cursed Earth periods until next chapter, it is not to be missed that this comet appeared in the skies precisely 1,242 years, 414 times 3, prior to the end of the 6,000-year timeline that began in 3895 BC and ends in 2106 AD, or 6000 AM. This comet was seen over Europe 552 years before the year 864 AD, when the Irish annals record that both a lunar and solar eclipse transpired. While the lunar eclipse may have occurred, astronomers note that no solar eclipses happened in this year, and they are correct, to the extent that the moon did not occult the sun, for we now have demonstrated how a comet transiting between the Earth and the sun will darken the solar orb with its debris tail, which envelops Earth. This was not Phoenix, but a large comet with an orbit detailed fully in Anunnaki homeworld. Julius Caesar was born in 101 BC, or 3794 AM, a man who brought immense changes to the Roman government and culture. Some believe he is the beginning of the Roman Empire. He became a dictator and was lamented as the cause for the fall of the Republic and emergence of the Caesars that followed him, curtailing many of the powers and privileges of the Senate. By his exploits did Rome become feared in all the courts of the Eurasian African nations, no kingdom inaccessible to Italy. As he was infamous, so too, 552 years after his birth, did an infamous invader attack Italy in 452 AD, named Attila the Hun, from regions so far away that the Romans had never heard of them. But this was not the first shock Rome had felt in the early Anno Domini years. On August 24th, 410 AD, at midnight, the Salarian Gate of Rome was quietly opened, and Alaric the Goth led the Visigoth army into the Eternal City, initiating the infamous sack of Rome. These Germanic hosts invaded the city and ransacked its private and public buildings, treasuries, galleries, storehouses, and temples. This emotional and humbling event inspired Augustine to compose his renowned work named City of God, in which he noted with awe that never before had an invasion force ransacked an entire city, leaving all its Christian shrines and sanctuaries untouched. Why this amazed Augustine is truly the mystery, for Christianity had early on swept through the German kingdoms at the borders of the Roman provincial territories like an uncontrollable fire. In fact, the spirit of Christian Germania would go on to forge the history of Europe itself. This sack of Rome was 552 years before the founding of the Holy Roman Empire of Germany, which began when Otto I was crowned emperor by Pope John XII at Nuremberg. We should not be surprised to learn that the Holy Roman Empire adopted as its seal the double-headed phoenix. This alliance between the papacy, Italy, and Germany would reoccur in World War II. In the year 762 AD, the Abbasid dynasty makes Baghdad its capital, the seat of Muslim authority, effectively establishing a second Babylon. The year 1314 AD was 552 years later, when the whole of the Middle East, Europe, and Asia reported unusual astronomical signs and disturbances. European historians reported a great dark blackness in the skies, while on the other side of the planet, during the daytime, the Chinese recorded that the sun darkened. This date was one of meteoric rain, plague fogs, strange mists, and terrible earthquakes. This was not Planet Phoenix. The event and phenomenon is fully expounded in Anunnaki Homeworld, for this was the last time the Anunnaki planet Nibiru passed through the inner system before it returns during the coming apocalypse. One of the most distinct denominators between these events is the fact that Babylon is the biblical symbol for an oppressive religion, and this symbol often refers to both Islam as well as the papacy of Rome, which assumes itself to be the true authority of the Christian world, which of course is not true. It was in 1314 AD that Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake, officially ending the Knights Templar, an organization that had protected church interests for many years, but fell to the greed and envy of a conspiracy between papacy officials and King Philip IV of France. Philip had ruthlessly tortured to death 36 knights, burned 34 of them at the stake, and confiscated all their estates and other wealth he could find. This oppressive nature of the church leads us to our next 552-year period. As 1314 AD was 552 years after 762 AD, so too does 1314 AD begin a 552 years timeline to 1866 AD, when the major European kingdoms of France, Spain, Austria, and others renounced Roman Catholic papal authority, and the sovereign pope within the Vatican was stripped of his power over most of Europe. It had been earlier prophesied that the papacy would fall in this year of 1866 AD, centuries before the event by the chronologists Heidelberg, as well as Cellarius, Parius, Gressner, and Fleming, all having specified the year 1866 AD. Also of interest concerning this unique year is the fact that it was exactly 3,312 years, or 552 times 6, after the exodus of Israel from Egypt in 1447 BC, after the 10 plagues devastated Africa. These 3,312 years parallel the entire longevity of the Age of the Phoenix. In 1447 BC, the volcanic mountain of Santorini exploded and caused tsunamis, earthquakes, and severe atmospheric contamination. And in 1866 AD, there was again volcanic activity at Santorini in the Aegean. One of the most unusual 552-year alignments again involves Islam and the Hebrews. In 1356 AD, a major earthquake shocked Egypt and destroyed the final vestiges of the Pharos Lighthouse, an immense structure wherein was composed by Hebrew scholars the famous Greek Septonnot translation of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, in the 3rd century BC. The quake dislodged some of the gigantic white polished facing blocks on the original exterior of the Great Pyramid, exposing for the first time the core inner limestone blocks of the monument that ascend 203 levels upward to its empty platform 481 feet above the plateau. These massive 20-ton casing blocks were smashed off the pyramid as local Muslims mined the Giza site for building materials to rebuild the earthquake-shattered city of Cairo. This earthquake was 552 years before another series of disasters and quakes that transpired in 1908 AD. In 1908 AD, over 900 witnesses watched a bright light trailing flames traverse the skies over Siberia. The object exploded in the air and destroyed 300 square miles of dense wood over Tunguska, Siberia, even knocking people off their feet 100 miles away. The pressure of the blast affected barometers in England, and sunsets for weeks were made beautiful by atmospheric dust. Radioactive traces of iridium, mostly an extraterrestrial element, from this comet revealed that the object weighed about 7 million tons. This event occurred on June 30th. On December 28th, at 5:20 a.m. in 1908 AD, a major earthquake rocked Messina, Sicily, followed by a tsunami 26 feet high that wreaked destruction throughout the city and pulled many people out to sea as the waters receded. Gas lines ruptured and fires raged uncontrolled for a death toll of 120,000 people. These earthquakes were 552 years apart. The link between the Israelites and Egypt is made more profound by a startling archaeological confirmation made in 1908 AD. After an archaeologist named Neville in 1883 AD claimed to have found evidence proving the Exodus story in the walls of the Egyptian ruins of the city of Pithom, another archaeologist named Kyle traveled to Egypt and researched the site himself in 1908 AD. He concluded that the evidence was real, that the walls of the city of Pithom exhibited at the lowest courses of masonry normal clay brick straw content. However, the middle courses were deficient in their amounts of traces of straw, and the uppermost courses had no straw at all. This was confirmation of the biblical Exodus story, where we learn that the Pharaoh in Egypt made the Israelites erect structures with clay burned bricks, shortening their straw rations over and over again. A further parallel of this scenario is found when considering that the Muslim extraction engineers were removing the bricks, stone casing blocks, off of the Great Pyramid to rebuild their buildings and mosques. The Great Pyramid site, known biblically as Goshen, where the Israelites in Egypt lived. They could see the enormous pyramid every day, and it was common knowledge of the times that the structure had been erected by their own Sethite ancestors before the flood. The story of the origin and purpose of the Great Pyramid is covered extensively in lost scriptures of Giza. Not surprisingly, our final 552-year period is also the last 552-year epoch possible in the 6,000-year timeline of man's banishment. It was the year 1554 AD, when a comet recorded by European astronomers passed through the night skies. This comet appeared 552 years prior to the year 6000 Annus Mundi, 2106 AD. 1554 AD is the year 5448 AM, this being the precise height of the Great Pyramid in pyramid inches, 5448. This 552 years measures the time/length until the chief cornerstone will descend from heaven and remove the curse that had afflicted mankind since the year 3895 BC. He will, for his millennial kingdom, reunite all the descendants of Israel and Judah, as well as Abraham and all those grafted into the divine family by faith. And again, we are not surprised to find that 1554 AD is exactly 2,484 years, or 414 times 6, after the split between Israel and Judah in 931 BC, at King Solomon's death. This 552 years/inch dimension is clearly found as the width of the ceiling of the subterranean chamber deep below the Great Pyramid as seen in chronotexture. Our review of some of the historic Phoenix cycles complete, we now delve into the archives of history as it unfolded through the patterns of cursed Earth periods.